What if I told you that everything you're chasing, the calm, the confidence, the sense that your life finally makes sense, isn't something you're going to find someday? It's something you already carry. Somewhere in you, right now, there's a version of yourself who isn't afraid of failing, who isn't waiting for permission to be happy, who has already forgiven the people who hurt them, already stopped comparing, already started living instead of merely preparing to live. That version of you isn't a fantasy. It's not 10 years and a better job away. It's a way of seeing, a way of meeting each ordinary hour. And by the end of the next 40 minutes, I want you to feel that person a little closer than they were when we started. Stay with me, because what we're about to explore isn't a checklist. It's something closer to philosophy, an old, quiet, deeply human way of thinking about a life well lived. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Let's begin. There's a certain kind of person you meet every once in a while who seems to move through the world differently than everyone else. They're not necessarily rich. They're not necessarily famous. But there's something settled about them, something unhurried. They laugh easily. They listen fully. When something goes wrong, they don't collapse. And when something goes right, they don't need to announce it to feel it. You walk away from a conversation with them feeling somehow lighter than when you arrived. We tend to call this kind of person wise. But I think what we're really responding to is something simpler. They have figured out how to live, not how to succeed, not how to perform, not how to impress. How to live. That's what we're going to spend this next hour thinking about together. Not a list of productivity hacks. Not 5 steps to happiness. Something older and slower than that. A handful of quiet arts that, when practiced daily, in small and glamorous ways, add up to a life that actually feels like yours. Think of this less as a lecture and more as a long, thoughtful walk. We'll wander through fear and how to meet it, through identity and what it actually means to be yourself, through work and how it can either drain you or become the very thing that makes you feel alive, through failure, and why the people who seem the most solid are usually the ones who have failed the most and simply refuse to stay down, through friendship, laughter, gratitude, and finally, through the strange and beautiful question of what we leave behind. Get comfortable. Put the phone somewhere you won't reach for it. And let's start where most transformation actually begins, with the thing most of us spend our whole lives quietly running from: fear. Here is something almost nobody tells you about fear. It was never your enemy. We grow up treating fear like a flaw, like a weakness we're supposed to outgrow, like proof that we're not brave enough yet. But fear is older than bravery. It's older than confidence. It's a warning system built into you over millions of years, and its entire job is to keep you alive. The problem was never that you feel fear. The problem is what you do with it once it arrives. Picture someone standing at the edge of a decision. Maybe it's a conversation they've been avoiding. Maybe it's a career change or a move to a new city, or simply the decision to say what they actually think in a room full of people who might disagree. Their hands go cold. Their stomach tightens. Every instinct says don't. Most people read that sensation as a stop sign. But what if it's actually a compass? What if the intensity of the fear is roughly proportional to how much the thing on the other side of it actually matters to you? You don't feel this way about trivial things. You feel this way about things that could genuinely change your life. And that's exactly why they're worth walking toward. There's an old story, the kind that gets passed down, because it captures something true even if the details blur with time, about a plague that swept toward a great city. Death itself was asked afterward how many people it had claimed. It answered honestly, only 5,000, but 50,000 had died. When press explained the difference, it simply said the rest died of fright. That story has survived for centuries because it names something we all recognize. Fear, left unchecked, unexamined, unchallenged, can do more damage than the thing it warns us about. It multiplies in silence. It grows enormous in the dark corners of the mind, in the 3 a.m. thoughts, in the stories we tell ourselves about what might go wrong. So what do you do with it? You don't try to eliminate it. That's the wrong goal entirely. And chasing it will only frustrate you. Because fear isn't the kind of thing that disappears through willpower. Instead, you learn to work with it. You let it sharpen your senses instead of paralyze your legs. You let it remind you what's actually at stake. And then you take the step anyway. Not because the fear is gone, but because you've decided the thing on the other side matters more than the discomfort of getting there. Every person who has ever done something remarkable felt this exact sensation before they did it. The difference between the people who live fully and the people who live small isn't the presence or absence of fear. It's a willingness to act while still feeling it. And here's the quieter, gentler truth hiding underneath all of this. Most of what we fear never actually happens. The rejection we dreaded doesn't come. The failure we imagine in vivid detail turns out to be survivable, even useful. The conversation we avoided for months takes 10 minutes and changes nothing catastrophic at all. Fear is a brilliant storyteller, but a terrible fortune teller. It's very good at making you feel things vividly. It's very bad at predicting what will actually occur. So the next time your chest tightens before something that matters, don't read it as a sign to retreat. Read it as a sign that you're standing exactly where growth happens. Breathe, feel it fully, and then gently, without needing to feel brave first, take the step anyway. That's the art of facing fear, not the absence of it, the friendship with it. There is an enormous, exhausting amount of energy most of us spend trying to become someone we already are. We watch other people, the way they speak, the way they dress, the shape of their success, and quietly, almost without noticing, we start editing ourselves to resemble them. We adopt opinions that aren't quite ours. We chase goals that were actually somebody else's dream, inherited so early we forgot to ask if we ever wanted them. And somewhere in all that editing, the original voice gets quieter and quieter until we can barely hear it over the noise of who we think we're supposed to be. Here's the strange comfort in this. No one else can be who you are, not because you're better than anyone, but because you are quite literally unrepeatable. The specific mixture of your history, your instincts, the odd things that make you laugh, the particular way your mind solves a problem. None of that exists anywhere else, has ever existed anywhere else, or will ever exist again. That's not a motivational slogan. It's simply mathematically true. So what does it actually mean to be yourself, rather than just talk about it? It starts with something almost embarrassingly simple. Paying attention to what you actually think before you check whether it's the acceptable thing to think. Most of us have trained ourselves to scan the room first. What does everyone else believe? What's safe to say? What will make people nod along? And only afterward do we quietly ask ourselves what we actually feel. Being yourself means reversing that order. Ask yourself first. Let the honest answer exist for a moment before you decide what to do with it. It also means making peace with the parts of yourself you spent years trying to hide. The sensitivity you were told was too much. The ambition you were told was too bold. the quietness you were told wasn't outgoing enough. Somewhere along the way, most of us picked up a mental list of things wrong with us, written by people who were often just uncomfortable with something in themselves. You don't have to keep carrying that list. You're allowed to put it down. There's a kind of quiet dignity in simply respecting your own presence in the world. Not arrogance, not self-importance. Just a basic recognition that you have a right to take up space, to have a perspective, to matter in the rooms you enter. Most people walk through life apologizing for existing, shrinking a little in every conversation, deferring their own judgment to whoever seems more confident. Imagine, instead, walking through your days believing you belong exactly where you are. And here's the part people miss most often. Becoming yourself isn't a destination you arrive at and then stop. It's not a fixed thing you either have or don't have. It's closer to a practice, a daily unfolding, a little more honesty today than yesterday. Some days you'll do it well. Other days, old habits of self-editing will creep back in, and that's fine too. The goal was never perfection. The goal is simply to keep turning back toward your own true voice again and again for the rest of your life. Because here's the thing nobody tells you when you're young and desperately trying to fit in. The people who end up most respected, most loved, most memorable are almost never the ones who blended in perfectly. They're the ones who, at some point, stopped apologizing for being exactly who they were and let that be enough. There's a version of work that drains you. You know at the moment you feel it. The Sunday evening dread, the way the clock seems to move slow the longer you watch it, the sense that you're spending your one irreplaceable life waiting for it to be over. And then there's another version of work entirely. The kind where hours disappear without you noticing. The kind where you find yourself thinking about a problem in the shower, not because you have to, but because you actually want to solve it. The kind that, strangely, gives you more energy than it takes. The difference between those two experiences almost never comes down to the job title. It comes down to something quieter. Whether you found a way to put a piece of yourself into what you're doing, or whether you're simply performing a role that was handed to you, work at its best isn't something separate from who you are. It's one of the clearest places where who you are actually gets to show up in the world. The care you put into something, the standard you hold yourself to when no one's watching, the small creative decision you make just because it feels right. Those are all expressions of character, whether the task is building company or repairing a fence. There's a wonderful old idea worth holding on to. That work isn't punishment, isn't a sentence to be endured until weekend arrives, but a kind of freedom, the freedom to build something, to help someone, to leave a small mark of your own making on the world. Most of us were taught, somewhere along the way, to think of work as the opposite of living. Clock in, survive it, then go live your actual life afterward. But what if that's backwards? What if work, done with intention, isn't the interruption of a meaningful life, but one of its main ingredients? This doesn't mean every job feels like a calling. Most people, at some point, do work that isn't glamorous. That doesn't feel like destiny. That simply needs to get done. But even there, something remarkable happens when you decide to do it well anyway. There's a certain pride, quiet and private, that comes from doing a small thing with full attention rather than half-hearted resentment. That pride compounds. It builds a kind of internal trust in yourself. The sense that you are someone who follows through, who cares about quality, who doesn't cut corners just because no one's checking. And if you're lonely or anxious or going through something heavy, There's an old and simple piece of advice that still holds up remarkably well. Work, not as an escape from your feelings, but as a way of anchoring yourself in something concrete while the feelings pass through you. Motion helps. Purpose helps. A task in front of your hands, however small, has a way of steadying a mind that's spinning. The deepest version of this art isn't about ambition at all. It's about presence. It's about bringing your full self, your care, your standards, your particular way of seeing into whatever is in front of you today. Because a life isn't made of grand declarations. It's made of Tuesday afternoons. And the way you spend your Tuesday afternoons, more than any 5-year plan, is what actually becomes your life. Natural pause for transition. Before we go further, if this way of thinking is resonating with you, if you're the kind of person who likes sitting with ideas like this rather than rushing past them, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel keep making things like this, and it means you won't miss the next one. Now, let's keep going because we're about to talk about something almost everyone gets wrong. Failure. Nobody warns you early enough that failure isn't the exception in a good life. It's a fixture of it. We grow up with a strange, almost fairy tale idea that success is supposed to move in a straight line, that if we're doing things right, each year should simply be better than the last, each attempt should build cleanly on the one before it. And then life happens, and the line turns out to be jagged, full of setbacks and false starts and plans that quietly fall apart. And we take it personally, as if the jaggedness itself is proof that something's wrong with us. It isn't. It's proof that we're doing something. The only people who never fail are the people who never attempt anything that could go wrong in the first place. And that is its own quieter kind of tragedy. There's a wonderful, almost blunt way of thinking about this. Research, real discovery, the kind that changes how we understand the world, is something like 99% failure. Only a small fraction ever works. And yet nobody looks back at a great discovery and remembers the 99 failed attempts. They remember the one that worked. The failures weren't a detour from the success. They were the price of admission to it. This is worth sitting with, because most of us treat every failed attempt as evidence that we should stop, when it might simply be evidence that we're paying the ordinary cost of doing something difficult. The scientist doesn't take the failed experiment personally. She adjusts a variable and tries again. That's not because she doesn't care about the outcome. It's because she understands, at a deep level, that failure is data, not verdict. Here's something else worth remembering, especially on the days it feels heaviest. You cannot always control what happens to you. Circumstances shift. Timing goes wrong. Other people make choices that affect your outcome in ways you never could have predicted, but you can always control how you respond to it. That single distinction between what happens to you and how you meet it might be the most useful piece of thinking a person can carry through a difficult life. Think of a ball being thrown against a hard floor. It doesn't stay down. The very shape of it, the tension inside it, sends it bouncing back up almost the instant it lands. That's not a bad metaphor for resilience. It's not about never falling. It's about developing enough internal tension, enough belief in yourself that going down simply isn't where you stay. And there's real comfort in an old phrase that has outlived every person who ever said it in a hard moment. This, too, shall pass. It's simple almost to the point of sounding like a cliche, but sit with it during your next difficult season and notice how true it actually is. Nothing, no grief, no failure, no crisis stays at its original intensity forever. Time moves it. Time softens it. Time eventually turns even our worst chapters into something we can tell as a story rather than something we're still trapped inside. So, if you're in the middle of something that feels like failure right now, a job that ended badly, a relationship that didn't work, a plan that collapsed, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not disqualified. You are not behind some invisible schedule everyone else is keeping. You are simply in the part of the story that, later, will make the rest of it mean something. Keep going. Fall forward instead of backward, and trust that the balance is already built into you, whether you can feel it yet or not. Of everything we'll talk about today, this might be the simplest, and yet somehow the one we neglect most. Ask most people what actually made their life good. Not impressive, not successful, but genuinely good, and almost none of them will point to an achievement. They'll point to people. A friend who showed up during a hard year. A person who made them laugh so hard they cried. Someone who believed in them before they believed in themselves. And yet friendship, real friendship, doesn't happen by accident. It's built slowly out of very ordinary choices repeated over time. The first and maybe most overlooked truth about friendship is this. If you want one, be one first. It sounds almost too simple to be useful, but think about how rarely we actually apply it. We wait to be greeted before we greet. We wait to be understood before we try to understand. We wait for someone else to reach out first, and then wonder why our circle feels thin. Friendship has a way of mirroring back whatever you put into it. Warmth tends to attract warmth. Genuine interest in someone else's life tends to be met eventually with genuine interest in yours. Real friendship also requires a kind of generous forgetting, a willingness to overlook someone's rough edges, their bad days, their occasional thoughtlessness, and keep seeing the best in them anyway. Nobody is at their finest all the time. If you only extend friendship to people during their most polished moments, you'll find your circle getting smaller every year. But if you can hold space for people's full humanity, mistakes, and all, you become the kind of person others feel safe being fully themselves around. And that safety, that feeling of being fully known and still fully accepted, is close to the very heart of what friendship actually is. There's something else worth naming, because it's easy to miss in a world that rewards constant talking. Real friendship also lives in silence, in the comfortable quiet of sitting with someone, without needing to fill every gap with words, in simply being present. Some of the deepest moments of connection in a life happen in rooms where almost nothing is said at all. And friendship asks something slightly uncomfortable of us too. It asks us to be more interested in someone else's happiness than in being right, more interested in lifting people up than in being the one who's smartest in the room. The friend who never says the harsh thing, who chooses encouragement over correction whenever there's a choice, tends to be the friend people return to for the rest of their lives. If your life feels a little lonelier than you'd like right now, here's something gentle and true to hold on to. It usually isn't too late to change that. Reach out first. Forgive the small stuff faster than feels natural. Say the kind thing out loud instead of just thinking it. Friendship rewards exactly this kind of small, repeated generosity, and it rewards it far more reliably than almost anything else you could spend your energy chasing. Somewhere along the way, a lot of us picked up the quiet belief that being serious is the same thing as being responsible. That if we want to be taken seriously, we need to hold our face in a certain careful arrangement. Treat every problem with heavy gravity. Never let anyone see us being silly or light. It's worth questioning that belief. because it might be costing you more than it's giving you. Laughter isn't the opposite of depth. Some of the wisest, most grounded people you'll ever meet are also the quickest to laugh, especially at themselves. There's something almost paradoxical about it. The people who take life's big questions the most seriously are often the ones who take their own small missteps the least seriously. They've made peace with not being perfect, and that peace shows up as an easy, unguarded laugh. Think about what laughter actually does inside a tense moment. A room full of anxious people, a difficult conversation, a mistake that's just been discovered. And then someone finds a way to laugh, genuinely, not to dismiss the seriousness of the situation, but to release some of the pressure building inside it. Suddenly people can breathe again. Suddenly the problem, while still real, feels solvable instead of crushing. That's not a small trick. That's one of the oldest tools humans have for staying sane through hard things. There's an old comparison worth remembering. A person without any lightness in them is like a wagon with no springs. Every small bump in the road jolts them uncomfortably because they have nothing to absorb the impact. A little bit of humor, a willingness to not take every setback with total gravity, acts like those springs. It doesn't make the road smoother. It makes you more able to travel it without being shaken apart by every pebble. And perhaps the most important form of laughter of all is the kind directed at yourself. Not the cruel, self-critical kind, but the warm, forgiving kind. The ability to notice your own mistakes, your own awkward moments, your own very human flaws, and meet them with a smile instead of shame. This one habit alone can lighten an entire life. It doesn't lower your standards. It just removes the unnecessary suffering of demanding perfection from a person, you, who was never going to be perfect in the first place. So give yourself permission, starting today, to laugh a little more freely at the world's absurdities, at your own missteps, at the sheer, strange comedy of being a person trying their best in a complicated world. It costs nothing, and it might just be one of the most underrated forms of strength there is. Here's something almost everyone discovers eventually, usually the hard way. You cannot chase happiness directly and expect to catch it. Happiness has a strange, slippery quality. The moment you turn it into a destination, I'll be happy once I get the promotion, once I find a relationship, once I finally arrive. It tends to keep receding just out of reach, always one achievement further away. But happiness has an odd habit of showing up unannounced, almost sideways, while you're busy doing something else entirely. Usually while you're helping someone. There's a lovely old image for this. Happiness is a bit like perfume. You genuinely cannot spray it onto someone else without getting a little of it on your own hands in the process. Help someone move, and something in you feels lighter too. Listen closely to a struggling friend, and something in you feels less alone too. It's almost impossible to give real warmth to another person without some of it settling back into you. And happiness, it turns out, has very little to do with circumstances and a great deal to do with attention. It doesn't depend on a full bank account nearly as much as it depends on a mind that's actually paying attention to what's good right now in this ordinary day. A cup of coffee that's exactly the right temperature. A friend who texts back at exactly the right moment. The particular color of the sky turns for about 4 minutes every evening. If you happen to be looking up when it happens, none of that requires wealth. It only requires noticing. This is where gratitude enters, not as a nice sentiment to post somewhere, but as an actual practice, a discipline almost of training your attention toward what's already good instead of endlessly scanning for what's still missing. Most of us are wired by evolution and by habit to notice threats and gaps far more readily than we notice abundance. Gratitude is a deliberate correction to that wiring. It's choosing on purpose to look at what you already have long enough to actually feel it. And there's a deeper layer to gratitude, too, beyond simply noticing what's good. It's the idea of turning thankfulness into action, not just feeling grateful, but living in a way that honors what you've been given. If you're grateful for your health, you care for your body. If you're grateful for your talents, you use them for something beyond yourself. If you're grateful for the people who shaped you, you try to shape someone else's life a little for the better too. Gratitude, lived fully, stops being a feeling and becomes a kind of ongoing repayment, not out of guilt, but out of genuine appreciation. Happiness, in the end, isn't something you're owed or something you're missing. It's something available quietly in almost every ordinary hour to anyone willing to notice it and willing to give some of it away. There's a kind of aging that has nothing to do with the calendar. You've met people in their 80s who seem more alive, more curious, more genuinely excited about the world than people decades younger. And you probably also met people who, while still young in years, already seem to have quietly given up, stopped asking questions, stopped trying new things, settled into a kind of premature staleness. The difference between those two people was never really about their age. It was about whether they kept growing. There's real truth hiding inside an old, simple idea. You don't grow old. You become old by no longer growing. The body ages regardless of what you do. That part is out of your hands. But the mind, the spirit, the sense of wonder, those things age only if you let them. They stay remarkably young in people who keep feeding them. What does that actually look like day to day? It looks like staying curious past the point where curiosity feels necessary. Reading something outside your usual interests. Asking a question you don't already know the answer to. Trying a hobby you have no particular talent for, simply because it's interesting. Meeting new people instead of only reinforcing the same familiar circle. Every one of these small acts keeps a mind flexible in exactly the way stiff and used minds are not. It also looks like refusing to let go of your dreams simply because a certain amount of time has passed. There's something quietly tragic about a person who decides, somewhere in midlife, that their dreaming years are over, that whatever they become by now is simply what they'll be for the rest of their life. But dreams don't actually have an expiration date. Some of history's most remarkable work was done by people well past the age most of us assume creativity fades. The ideas didn't stop coming because the years kept accumulating. They kept coming because the person kept showing up for them. There's also something to be said for keeping a cheerful disposition, not as forced positivity, but as an active choice about which internal, whether you allow to dominate your days. A heavy, cynical outlook tends to calcify over time, making a person feel older than their years. A genuinely light, hopeful disposition tends to do the opposite. It keeps something inside a person soft and alive, no matter how many years have technically passed. So if you find yourself worrying about getting older, notice that the worry is almost always aimed at the wrong target. The wrinkles are inevitable. The gray hair is inevitable. But the aliveness inside you, the curiosity, the willingness to try something new, the capacity to still be surprised by the world, none of that is inevitable in either direction. It's a choice, renewed daily, and it's entirely available to you regardless of what the calendar says. We're nearing the end of our time together. And I want to close on a question that, in some ways, quietly sits underneath everything we've already discussed. What happens to all of this after you're gone? It's not a morbid question. It's actually one of the more clarifying questions a person can sit with, because it strips away almost everything unimportant and leaves you looking directly at what actually matters. Here's something worth remembering. No one arrives at who they are alone long before you were born. Other people were already quietly shaping the world you'd eventually be handed. Someone fought for a freedom you now take for granted. Someone taught a teacher who eventually taught you. Someone modeled a kind of patience or courage or honesty that somehow made its way through a long invisible chain into your own character. You didn't build yourself from nothing. You were built, in part, out of the accumulated goodness of people you will never meet, most of whom are long gone and none of whom ask for credit. And that chain doesn't stop with you. It continues quietly through you. Every kind thing you do for someone else has a way of outliving the moment it happened in. The encouragement you offer a struggling friend might become the exact thing they remember years later at a moment when they need it most. The example you set for a child, without even realizing you're setting one, might become an invisible mark they measure their own choices against for the rest of their life. None of this requires fame. It requires only presence, showing up again and again as the kind of person whose influence is worth carrying forward. There's something almost freeing in realizing this, because it means you don't need a grand, dramatic legacy to matter. The buildings we build eventually crumble. Even the most impressive achievements fade from memory within a generation or two. But the quieter monuments, the wisdom passed from one person to another, the courage modeled and then absorbed, the simple kindness that changed the direction of someone's day, those have a way of moving forward through time in ways far more durable than stone. So as you think about the life you're building, don't measure it only by what you'll leave behind in terms of achievement. Measure it, instead, by what you'll leave behind in other people, the way you made them feel, the example you set when no one was watching closely, the small, ordinary kindnesses that, strung together over an entire lifetime, quietly become the truest measure of who you were. If there's one thread running through everything we've talked about today, it's this: a good life isn't assembled out of a handful of enormous, dramatic moments. It's assembled quietly and almost invisibly out of thousands of small, ordinary choices. How you meet your fear, how honestly you let yourself be seen, how much of yourself you put into your work, how gently you treat yourself after you fail, how generously you show up for the people around you, how often you let yourself laugh, how closely you pay attention to what's already good, how much curiosity you keep alive as the years pass, and how much of your own light you're willing to pass on to someone else before you go. None of this requires permission. None of it requires the perfect circumstances, the right amount of money, the ideal starting point. It's available to you exactly as you are, exactly where you are, starting today, in whatever ordinary hour comes next after this one ends. So here's my send-off to you. Don't wait for some future version of your life to start practicing any of this. The person you're hoping to become, calmer, braver, warmer, more fully yourself, isn't waiting at the end of some long road. They're available to you right now, in the next small choice you make. Meet your fear with a little more courage today. Be a little more honestly yourself in your next conversation. Do your next piece of work with a little more care. Forgive yourself a little faster the next time you stumble. Reach out to someone first instead of waiting to be reached. Notice one good thing before the day ends and actually let yourself feel it. That's the art of living, not a destination. A daily practice, always available, always within reach. Thank you for spending this time with me. If it meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And until then, go live like it matters, because it does.